Lordy, lordy, look who's 40. It's the Paperback Warrior Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Paperback Warrior Podcast. We're a vintage fiction discussion and review program talking about paperbacks of the 20th century in the crime, action-adventure, western, and espionage genres. The podcast is an offshoot of our blog. You can find paperbackwarrior.com, where every day, 7 days a week, we post book reviews and features discussing the best fiction ever. At least we think so. Let me introduce my co-host Tom, who has emerged from his doomsday bunker to record this show with me tonight. How are you feeling, Tom?
I'm doing good, actually. I feel like I may have had the coronavirus before it was cool. There was like a couple days back, what seems like a million years ago, when that week when they were like canceling the NBA and the NCAA, where I just had like 101 fever for like 48 hours and with body aches and being sleepy, no cough, no nothing. And it was only 101, which isn't as shocking, but this never happens to me. I'm like the healthiest man alive. And then I woke up the next day covered in my own sweat and feeling fine. I felt fine ever since. So I can't wait till there's like an antibody test to see who had it with like super easy symptoms, because I think I'm that guy.
It's interesting that you tell me that now. Can you still be a carrier?
No. This is way more than 14 days ago at this point, and so
it leaves your system completely. Or?
Well, that's the theory, right?
Okay.
I mean, but we're still good bit away from each other, and we're keeping the heavy petting to a minimum.
Yeah, tonight anyway.
Yeah. How about you? Any issues?
No, I've been working from home for 7 years now, so it hasn't really been a disruption in my income. My wife's still working. My daughters are attending school online. Thankfully, we're all healthy. I know it's a really tough time for everyone right now. And I know, speaking on behalf of Paperback Warrior, we hope everyone listening at home is safe. We hope you're healthy and surviving this hardship. Our hearts certainly go out to you.
Yeah, I think about that a lot because, a lot of our listeners are 65 years or older men, and so it would just break my heart if anything happened to one of our guys.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, so now that we've expressed compassion on this very serious topic, let's make light of it a little bit. A few weeks ago we were discussing our favorite adventure and suspense books involving plagues and viral warfare. A listener named Graham from Australia, one of our most loyal listeners, reached out for me to recommend two other books, which both look great. First one, I showed you the cover, is The Nightmare Factor by Thomas Scorsha and Frank Robinson. It's from 1978. It went through several printings with different cover art, but if you can see the pan one, and I'll try to post that on in our show notes on the Facebook page, the pan one is by far the most unsettling of the covers. It has this close-up of a dude, really menacing looking, with a giant surgical mask on his face. The plot synopsis says it began with an isolated incident. A convention of war veterans at a San Francisco hotel was decimated by a mysterious and deadly disease. Now, the hero of this novel, Eric, is an epidemiologist named Calvin, who's investigating the superbug that's killing Americans. But the man keeps trying to stop him with news blackouts, military intervention. Who is the enemy, Eric? Who can be trusted? One thing is certain, everyone is a potential victim. Graham believes, our buddy in Australia, that this book was actually inspired by Legionnaire's disease, because the setup with the veterans meeting is almost the same and as to how it happened in real life. So that one looks sort of interesting to me. The other one he hyped has a really crummy cover, and it's called Inoculate, with a exclamation point after it, so you know it's serious.
Right.
By Neil Bain, Bayne. This is from 1979. Now, the cover of this one's way less enticing. Like I said, it features a submarine, some dolphins, and the Grim Reaper. There's nothing about this cover that makes me want to read it, Eric. It's the evil flu-like virus in this one is called Phage T36. It breaks out of an Air Force base in Michigan, and the virus is even more horrible than the Black Plague. People are dying all over the world. The president authorizes an emergency inoculation program. But a federal agent named Gabe Hinman says, not so fast, Eric. Maybe the president has ulterior motives. There's a conspiracy brewing inside the Oval Office, and it's a plot of such staggering magnitude that the fate of the entire world is at stake. Again, Graham in Australia believes that this one was actually inspired by the 1976 swine flu epidemic. Yeah. So those of you who are not getting enough viral nonsense in your diet have two more books, The Nightmare Factor and Inoculate, that you can add to your viral fiction collection.
Well, thanks, Tom, and thanks to Graham from Australia. Really appreciate that. I'm sure our listeners are hungered for even more pandemic content and need even more reasons to be terrified. Speaking of helpful listeners, we put out the call in an earlier episode for listeners to throw a couple bucks in the Paperback Warrior tip jar, and some of you answered the call. I want to say thanks to Frank Socha, might be Frank Soka, the Dark Lords, Marshall Blankenship, and Conan Pervez for their kind and generous donations. All money donated to the show goes right back into the production cost, our equipment, software, web hosting, and so forth. None of it is being used for toilet paper and hand sanitizer. I want you to know that. Your donations to Paperback Warrior keep the podcast ad-free and prevent us from having to put content behind a paywall. I mean, we all hate those.
Oh, those are the worst.
You can donate by going to paperbackwarrior.com's desktop version. In the upper right-hand corner, you're going to see the PayPal link. Just click on that. It'll take you to the site where you can spend your hard-earned money donating it to the show. In fact, it was a listener donation that gave us the idea for this episode, right?
Yeah. So this is true. So we received a very generous donation from a listener named Robin Brown. It was so generous that I thought there had to be an error of some kind, and I also thought that one of the old men who listened maybe had his wife send the donation, because it was inconceivable to me that a woman, other than your wife and my wife, would actually enjoy the show. So I reached out for Robin in Canada to thank her, and we had a very nice little back and forth. It was kind of cool.
Interesting, okay.
Anyway, so Robin, as it turns out, is a paperback collector who discovered the podcast in February 2020. She collects a lot of the series titles we discuss here, and she says she enjoys digging out copies of the books we discuss from her own collection and taking a look at them and revisiting them. Like almost everyone, she's been self-quarantining, waiting for this whole pandemic to blow over, and she's been listening to episodes on the show during her lunch break at home while she's working from home. She has some topic discussions for us that made a lot of sense, and one of them is actually tied into a New Year's resolution that I made.
She wants you to slow down on the porn.
No, it's funny. No, the other one.
Oh, okay.
She asked if we could do an episode on either women authors, women detectives, and women characters. Now, for the record, Robin was not trying to be a pain in the neck about this. It wasn't like she was like making some like feminist stand. Okay. She just thought that although the genre is male action, she can't believe that she's the only woman reading this genre, and that there had to be some women writing this stuff too. So you're the boss here, Eric. Tell me, why don't we cover more female authors? Is it because you hate women?
No. I love women. I even married one. I have 2 daughters and 3 female dogs. But what I don't have is a lot of female authors on my bookshelf. The type of books that I like to read they just typically aren't written by women.
Okay, well, that's fair enough. Now, in my defense, I do read books by women, but almost never crime fiction or adventure. One of the best books I read last year was a contemporary novel by a woman. The book was called The 15 Lives of Harry August by Claire North, and it was awesome. It was kind of like this book that I loved called Replay by Ken Grimwood, or even Groundhog Day. It's about a guy named Harry August who gets to relive his life again and again with complete memory of the previous iterations of his life, so he could amass, a good fortune and all that. Along the way, he learns that he's part of this hidden race of people who are circling through time together at the same time as he is. So they eventually begins meeting other people who are doing what he's doing. But because it's a contemporary book in sort of the fantasy sci-fi arena, it's not really what we do here. But if anyone wants to read it, it's by a female. Her name is Claire North, and the book is called The 15 Lives of Harry August. It was awesome.
So you think that reading one book by a woman every 2 years absolves you from your sexism? You don't think you can do better than that?
You're putting me on the spot here. We can both do better, Eric. And so what we decided after discussing off air is that maybe you and I would both pick a book by a woman author, and read it and review it for the show. And I thought, well, heck, while we're at it, let's also read books by minority authors, like African American authors, so that you should probably know about. So to be clear, we're not doing this in some lame attempt to be woke or politically correct, but just it makes sense. So it's also sort of hilarious to have an episode in our iTunes feed or our Apple feed called "Women and Minorities," because I think it'll just attract the kind of heat that we need. So we're each going to review one woman book and one minority book today. You cool with that?
That sounds phenomenal.
Well, what could go wrong? All right, so why don't you go first since you're walking into this minefield first?
All right.
What did you read?
Okay. So the novel I chose was 1959's Bulletproof, written by a female author named Amber Dean. She grew up in Rochester, New York, and she wrote 17 mystery novels between 1944 and 1973. Some of these novels featured an amateur detective named Abby Harris, and apparently she was a nosy neighbor who helps the police solve crimes in and around Rochester, New York. But my first experience with this author is Bulletproof, which is a standalone novel. Now, the book has Jack and his wife Betty living in a rural neighborhood in upstate New York. Now, nearby is this juvenile delinquent facility called Diligence that houses a 16-year-old kid named Henry. Now, Tom, Henry is a fruitcake. I mean, a real nut job.
All right.
So off page, he escapes from the facility, robs a house, and steals a couple of guns, including this .22 rifle, which my dad would call a real fine squirrel gun. But Henry apparently uses the rifle to shoot and kill Betty while she's holding 2 cans of beer peacefully on her front porch. This opening chapter was just rather confusing. But next, this entire opening sequence is replaced all over again from Henry's perspective. And apparently this author had a knack for transitioning the perspective to various characters throughout her books. So in Bulletproof, we have perspectives from Jack, Henry, local law enforcement, and Jack's sexy secretary, Hallie. It's in Hallie's headspace that Dean condemns the readers. It's like she was punishing me, Tom. Inside Hallie's head, I watched her lust after Jack, flirt with a cop, and have these daydream sequences where a husky cop takes her to his mountain cabin for a weekend of romance. Seriously, I was exhausted with reading about Hallie. Tom, here's the thing. The image on the cover happens about page 80 of a 120-page novel. You've probably seen the artwork when we posted this episode, but it's a woman tied to a chair with a rifle beside her. It's really great cover art. But this scene doesn't happen until page 80. This is after Henry goes to the drive-in, he plays in the forest, he eats canned food in a lady's basement, he peeps on a maintenance man installing a window. Really riveting stuff, right? This isn't remotely interesting to anyone, but the author includes it all. But he eventually captures Hallie, he ties her to a chair, and then he just drives off. There's a surprise twist at the end, but nobody even cared at that point. Now, I'm sure Amber Dean is a fine mystery author, and I'm sure she has her share of cozy mystery fans. But based on my experience with Bulletproof, I'm not one of them. Her method of, saddling the storytelling on a number of characters was really confusing to me. But after a shocking opening chapter, the rest of the book just waddles in mediocrity. Hallie is this overbearing sex goddess that remains tied in a chair for most of the book's finish. Tom, I hated this.
Oh, Jesus.
It was absolutely dreadful. I don't wish it on anyone. I'll say it isn't a resident of our infamous Hall of Shame, but it's at least camping out on their doorstep for the time being.
Man, poor Robin is going to ask for her money back after that review. I have 3 Amber Dean books here in front of me.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, yeah. I have Encounter with Evil. That's an amazing cover.
It is.
And what a great the basic plot of this one, and I haven't read it yet, but I always pick it up thinking I'm going to read this one, although after your review, maybe I won't. Was she a good writer? Was her prose okay?
Yeah, she was a fine writer.
It was her plotting was your issue.
The plotting was the problem,
okay.
And I don't want to I'm going to get condemned if I say this, but from the female perspective of the way that she writes, it's all driven around romance, lusting after the male hero or who she wants to be the male hero.
Right.
And I've read that in her books. That's the common theme, is that she has a character that's lusting after someone else.
Well, this one here, Encounter with Evil, this yellow cover that I'm holding up, it's got a cool plot. It's like a Griswold's Vacation where they stop at a filling station of some kind with their daughter asleep in the back seat. They go inside the gas station, they come back out, they get in the car and start driving, and they realize that their daughter has disappeared while they're gone. Kind of a cool plot.
Yeah, that is.
Then I have one here by Amber Dean called Something for the Birds, which also has a really cool looking cover, right?
Do you know the summary of this one?
The summary of this one is it's bird watchers.
Yes.
The cover does not do it justice. The cover looks like it's like a Parker book, but it's bird watchers who accidentally see a bank robbery while they're watching birds. And then we have Deadly Contact, which also has a nicely painted cover until you realize all it really is a Dalmatian trying to eat Christmas tree bulbs. And I think this one is about a hitman who kills the wrong person or something like that. I could never read this book because it's actually written in microfiche. The print is so small. Anyway, so that's Amber Dean. If anyone wants to try her out, you could probably do better than Bulletproof as far as picking titles by her. But Eric, would you ever revisit an Amber Dean book?
I will, and I'm really curious about Something for the Birds. And I had read something online in researching this episode, and it said that book was really good. But did you have any luck at all with yours?
Okay, well, let me go through mine, and I'm not going to spoil whether I liked it or not.
Okay.
But the book I chose was Detour to Death by Helen Nielsen. The book is from 1953. Now, Helen Nielsen, I did some homework, is a reliably successful hard-boiled crime writer, or was, with a great reputation. A lot of people really like her books. And she also led a pretty interesting life. She lived from 1918 to 2002. In fact, she was born in 1918, the year of the Spanish flu epidemic. She was born in Roseville, Illinois, and she graduated from the Art Institute of Chicago with training in aeronautical drafting. Before she started writing, she actually works as a draftsman, probably a draftsperson, which would be better said, during World War II, and she actually helped design the aircrafts, including the B-36, the XB-47, and the P-80. Now, for 60 years of her life, she lived in Laguna Beach in Oceanside, California, where a lot of her stories take place. Now, her proximity to Hollywood when she was living in California no doubt helped her get a foot in the door as a screenwriter, and she scripted episodes of Alfred Hitchcock Presents and Perry Mason. Now, I chose her as my women author because she had a good reputation among people that I trust. Starkhouse Press has reprinted a bunch of her novels as trade paperbacks and a mass market book on their Black Gat imprint. She wrote 19 novels in her career and a ton of short stories. So my introduction to her work was this 1953 paperback called Detour to Death. And it was also released just as Detour. So you may see it one way, you may see it the other way. It's been reprinted multiple times under both titles. The book is available today as a cheap ebook and an audiobook, both free with your Kindle Unlimited subscription. And I did the ebook. I didn't do the audiobook. It's about this kid named Danny Ross, who's an 18-year-old drifter hitchhiking south from Chicago, basically just in search of a new start. Maybe he was headed toward Mexico. He gets a ride with this kindly physician named Dr. Gaynor, who needs to make a quick detour in the small town of Mountain View, where the doc has patients among the locals. So they pull in there. After a brief visit in the town diner, Doc heads back to his car, and Danny comes to join him minutes later and finds Doc murdered with a blow to the head. Someone bashed his brains in. So it's pretty standard setup for a whodunit, right? And because Danny's a stranger in town and the one who found the bludgeoned doctor, he's immediately the prime suspect for the murder, and he's detained pending further police investigation, which includes like beatings. Fortunately, two attorneys, one a local drunk and the other an accomplished trial lawyer, team up to investigate the matter to learn the truth, and this leads to some astonishingly unrealistic scenes of investigative procedures. At some point, the attorneys want to go take a look at the crime scene and some other things, and they get the sheriff and they bring Danny along, like the subject who's in custody for this murder.
That seems odd.
And they're dragging them around town, examining crime scenes and interviewing witnesses with like the four of them together, and in a handful of scenes that just defy any basic understanding of law enforcement operations, right? I don't need this to be the 87th Precinct or some Joseph Wambaugh novel, which is like ripped from the headlines with reality. It was just crazy. So, I don't know, man. Nielsen, she could craft a decent mystery, right? And she was a good writer, solid prose, but she introduces way, way too many characters in this 192-page book. I get that it's a small town and a lot of people are suspects with varying motives, but I needed like a Game of Thrones style org chart to keep track of all the townsfolk, their alliances, their grievances, their cousins, their ex-boyfriends, all that. Anyway, back to the woman thing. She made some narrative choices that I think her male contemporaries would have done way differently. For example, the sheriff beats Danny to a bloody pulp to try to elicit a confession. Kind of a cool scene, right? 100% of the scene is done off page. Do you think for a second that Dan J. Marlowe would have passed up an opportunity to chronicle every nose-crunching blow in a police interrogation scene like that? She skipped over the whole thing, and there's just a reference to the fact that it had just occurred as Danny's recovering. Now, there's other examples where Nielsen pulled punches, both literally and figuratively, that served to make the novel just rather soft-boiled. I could go on, but you get the idea. This book, Detour to Death, was really just a very paint-by-numbers mystery whodunit. Again, Nielsen could clearly write well enough, but her plotting in this one was such a snooze. Now, seeing the shortcomings of Detour to Death through a gendered prism may not be fair to other female authors, but we can't also be grading women authors on a curve, right? Just because the writer was a lady. There's certainly plenty of crappy crime novels by both men and women in the 1950s. I think what happened was we just both picked bad books by women. And I was just hoping something better because Helen Nielsen has such a good reputation for quality. I should probably revisit her through some of the Stark House books because I know that Greg Shepard, who's the boss of Stark House, has good taste. But then again, Greg may have picked Detour to Death back when he was doing the work with Prologue Books.
Yeah. Oh, dear. Well, I was really hoping you struck gold on your end. Our attempt to showcase female talent seems to be going rather poorly.
I know. Listen, we just both picked authors writing in our favorite genre, and both books just happen to suck. It doesn't mean that there's no good female writers out there. We just got incredibly unlucky, is my opinion. So here's the thing. There are plenty of female hard-boiled writers today doing stuff who are supposed to be great. A woman named Megan Abbott is supposed to be fantastic. I haven't read any of her books, but she wrote a throwback hard-boiled crime novel called Queen Pin that everyone raves about. And there's this woman, Krista Faust, who's writing some real blood-on-the-knuckles novels for hard case crime, including Money Shot and Chokehold. And I actually read a comic book that she wrote, which I just thought was okay. So I'm not – none of this is to denigrate women authors. I just think that you and I both picked bad books. So let's turn to African-American authors, Eric. Tell me what'd you read?
Okay. So I chose a 1974 men's action-adventure paperback written by – an African-American author named Joseph Nizel.
I'm
not sure.
I'm not sure either.
It's called $1 Billion Death, and it was the debut of a short-lived series called Iceman. It was published by Holloway House, which, Tom, was a very prolific Los Angeles publisher that focused on African-American authors and their culture. You have to remember that in the 1970s, the black exploitation phenomena had captured theater audiences nationwide. We're talking about stuff like Shaft, Willie Dynamite, The Mac. Those films would influence men's action-adventure fiction. Holloway House had a successful marketing run by introducing African-American characters within the backdrop of the urban 1970s. Along with Iceberg Slim and Donald Goines, Joseph Nizel was among the publisher's most prolific authors. Nizel authored over 60 literary works, ranging from biographies, romance, action-adventure. His work with hard-hitting, violent series like Black Cop, which he wrote under the pseudonym Dom Gober, My Name is Black, and Iceman catered to men of any color. These were grimy, intense street thrillers. Readers historically loved or hated them. My first experience with Nizel was this Iceman debut installment. Iceman is a dude named Henry Highland West. His story is a rags-to-riches journey from a lowly drug-dealing pimp in Harlem to this posh, extremely wealthy West Coast kingpin. His empire is a fortress-styled city in Las Vegas called the Oasis. Tom, I want you to think of it like Nevada's Bunny Ranch, where men, most of which are criminals, go to hang out and indulge in various types of debauchery. It's 10 square miles of sin. In the opening pages, a mob kingpin is blown to smithereens inside the Oasis. So Iceman is really pissed. It makes him look bad. So with his 2 kung fu babes, which are pictured on the cover of this book, he attempts to find out who iced one of his allies in his own yard. Based on my small sample size, the Iceman series isn't very good.
Oh, no.
Nizel's writing is one-dimensional, and often I found myself mired in these deep character discussions without any real payoff or connection to the actual story that's happening. There's some gunplay, there's a fun fight scene in a garage, and of course there's the helicopter scene featured on the book's cover. But even these small slivers of joy I felt were ruined by the overall drivel that refused to deliver anything noteworthy. Tom, I hate to say this, but I think I'm going to put Iceman on the deep freeze. There might be hope for Joseph Nizel, though. So one of Paperback Warrior's good friends, a guy named Kurt, suggested that Nizel's best work is My Name is Black. He rants and raves about that series, says it's fantastic.
It's got a great cover. I remember seeing that.
It does have a great cover. I haven't seen any of those out and about. I haven't seen them in the wild. But Kurt is normally right on the money. I like what he reads. But in the meantime, Iceman is terrible.
Okay, all right.
How about you, Tom?
All right, so several friends of mine have told me to check out Chester Himes, who wrote a series of hard-boiled crime novels called the Harlem Detective Series. Basically 9 books about NYPD detectives Gravedigger Jones and Coffin Ed Johnson. Now, so I downloaded a bunch of them into my Kindle, and I promise to read and review them soon because they're supposed to be fantastic. But this isn't like fantastic for a black author. They're just supposed to be like straight up good books with no grade inflation. However, I didn't get a chance to read those in time for this episode, but I did read and review a men's action adventure novel called Black Samurai by Mark Olden. When African-American author Mark Olden began his fiction writing career in the 1970s, he actually juggled 2 different action-adventure series characters. Now, as Robert Hawke, he wrote 9 books in the Narc series, which spanned from 1973 to 1975. Now, you read and reviewed a couple of the Narc books, right?
Yes, I did. I read and reviewed the series debut for Paperback Warrior. In fact, the opening scenes in that book is one of the best action sequences I've ever read, Tom. We're talking about shotguns galore. I really enjoyed it a lot. I thought it was a really gritty men's adventure paperback for the 70s. I haven't read any more of them, but I want to. I've picked up a few on since I read that one, but I just haven't got around to read them.
Mark Olden is awesome. Okay, so the Black Samurai series, the one I'm reviewing today, lasted 8 installments, all released in 1974 and 1975, which has got to be a super heavy production schedule for a relatively new author. And Black Samurai #1 is just a fantastic introduction from an author who clearly just understood this genre. So the book opens in 1973 with this action-packed massacre at a samurai training camp outside of Tokyo. After being banished, the bad guy has been banished from the U.S. Army for Vietnam War crimes, and he's a former colonel, and his name is Leo Tolstoy, who's like a famous Russian author's name. But so I don't know why Mark Olden chose to name this American disgraced colonel Leo Tolstoy, but whatever. Tolstoy has this group of rogue commandos and a pack of attack dogs who launched this bloody raid on the samurai encampment. There's slaughtered samurai students everywhere, and the master of the camp, all dead and all Japanese, with the exception of the one survivor, our hero, Robert Sand. The reader is quickly presented a few flashbacks that explain how this American black guy became a black samurai with a paperback series of his own. As a character, Sand is not exactly brimming with personality, but man, oh man, does he know how to kick ass. The action sequences featuring Sand's quest for vengeance are really well written, and it's this perfect blend of bloody martial arts fighting with gory gunplay. Sand is this earnest man of honor who's intelligent, gallant, courageous, highly skilled in every martial art discipline. However, this inaugural Black Samurai novel really succeeds because of the addition of 2 key characters. An outstanding diabolical villain. This Colonel Tolstoy is just an awful person. And then he's got this great trope of this powerful billionaire benefactor who's kind of supporting his efforts. Again, Colonel Tolstoy is one of the best bad guys ever appearing in a 1970s numbered paperback. He's got this suicide squad of lethal toadies, which include an Arab terrorist, an IRA gunman, a Vietnamese torture specialist, and an American black militant, all led by this U.S. Army officer bent on revenge. He's this growling, loathsome, genocidal maniac, and the reader really becomes invested in his downfall. Now, early in the novel, the reader's also introduced to what I thought was the most interesting character, a former 2-term U.S. president named William Barron Clark. President Clark was responsible for discharging Colonel Tolstoy from the army following his atrocities in Vietnam, and now he uses his money and influence to basically save the world behind the scenes. He's this brash Texan running an off-the-books intelligence apparatus and sponsoring capable action heroes to prevent global tragedies. He's got this working relationship with the Black Samurai, our hero, and it's this rich relationship between these 2 guys, the benefactor and the muscle, basically. The plot's extremely well executed and structured similarly to like an early Mac Bolan novel. novel. Good guy scenes and bad guy scenes alternate with this very satisfying and violent conclusion. Blood is shed, women are laid, ethnic stereotypes abound. It's a formula that works because Olden is such a good writer, and he can spin a tale with interesting characters and vivid action and creative bloodshed. I don't have enough good things to say about this. Book 1 of the series will definitely make the reader want to tap into future Black Samurai adventures. After Robert Olden died in 2003, and then digital fiction became a thing, his estate did something real smart. They kept his work alive by making the books available on ebook and audio platform at affordable prices. And I'm always surprised that more rights holders haven't gone this route to monetize and preserve genre fiction. But that's just my pet peeve. Modern readers who want to explore Olden don't need to scour paperbacks for scarce and decaying copies. Black Samurai, if you want to read that, it's just a click away.
Tom, you saved this episode from being the most negative take on women and minorities ever written.
I know.
God bless you.
I'm a hero to women and minorities. They should put a statue of me in the town square. Eric, I think the important thing is that we scour the globe and read books that look promising and interesting from the 20th century, and we give our fans the straight dope as to their quality. The fact that there weren't a lot of women and minorities writing our types of books back then, it's sad. I wish they were, but they weren't. It's not our fault, though, right? It's not your fault. It's not my fault. We'd really be screwing over our fans and our reputations as critics by giving books a favorable review solely because it was written by a woman or minority, and it's just not fair.
Okay. Fair enough. Let me throw it back to you, the listener, particularly in terms of female authors. If you know of a book of an author that we should be reading and reviewing, please let us know. The best way to reach us is Facebook, or you can email us directly at paperbackwarrior@yahoo.com. Tom, that's it for this episode. We ran over a little.
Okay, sorry. But please join us at paperbackwarrior.com every day for more vintage fiction reviews and every Monday for new episodes of the podcast. So thank you so much. Bye-bye now.
Bye.